Hey everyone, welcome to the NFL video. This one we're going over my core plays for week 7 of the NFL season on Draftkings. But before we continue, in the comments below, I want to know who you guys think is going to be the slate breaker for week 7. So last week, it was Stephon Diggs at low ownership. So I want to know who you guys think it can potentially be for this week. And also, before we continue, if you could leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Really helps me out, and I really appreciate it. Also, follow me on Twitter at ChrisPinell16. And if you're interested in the spreadsheets I build every single week, links in the description below for my Patreon and Slack chat. And I think that's it, so let's get right into it. So at quarterback, I know it was absolutely horrendous last week for Jared Goff, but I'm all in on this bounce back for the Rams this week. He is 6,200 going up against the Atlanta Falcons, and this is a 54-point over-under, which is highest on the slate. And they also own the highest implied team total of the slate at 28 and a quarter. Atlanta's giving up the most points per game to quarterback position this season at 26.4 points per game. They're 30th DVOA versus the pass. And Jared Goff is throwing the ball a ton, 41 times per game, which is near league high. He's behind Matt Ryan and someone else off the top of my head, but it's pretty near league high. And they also play at the second highest pace of play in the league, only behind the Arizona Cardinals. And like I always say with running backs and wide receivers, I want volume. And, that goes for quarterbacks too. Matt Ryan, Jared Goff, they're throwing the ball a ton. So it makes sense they're going to have more opportunity to get fantasy points. Now, I will say Goff is complete garbage under pressure, but Atlanta is the worst team in the league at generating pressure, as they are 32nd in adjusted sack rate and only averaging 0.83 sacks per game on the season. So, like when I like Deshaun Watson, I believe week 5, he went absolutely nuts. And like I said, his offensive line was struggling, but Atlanta can't generate pressure, and he ended up going off. He had time to throw and catch on deep balls. And really the same goes here for Jared Goff. Now, I really don't think he's going to hit much deep balls, but I think he's going to have a fantastic game here. I'm really buying into the bounce back. He's 6,200. He's pretty cheap, I think. So definitely like Jared Goff. And the running back situation really isn't set in stone. Will Todd Gurley play? Will he not? We don't know. Malcolm Brown's not a world beater or anything, so I think they're going to rely on the passing game here. And I think Jared Goff's a pretty fantastic play, and I'd even play him in cash games. I know he was awful last week, but I think we're going to get at least 20 points here, 30-point ceiling. And then core play number 2 for a quarterback position for me is going to be Kyler Murray at 6,700 versus the Giants. He's got a high floor and ceiling with his rushing ability. He hasn't scored below 17 points in the game this season, which I will take all day. 49.5 point over-under for this game, which is the third highest on the slate, only behind the Falcons-Rams game and then the Seattle Seahawks and the Baltimore Ravens. The Giants are 29th DVOA versus the pass this season. They're giving up 23.8 points per game to quarterbacks and over 300 passing yards per game. Cardinals play at the highest pace of any team this season, which leads to more volume, as he's fourth in the slate in pass attempts per game. And like I always say, volume is money in DFS, pretty much what I said with Jared Goff. And their defense is just so atrocious. It keeps other teams in games, keeping the Cardinals having to fire away. They can't lay off the gas, which, they're not the best team in the world, especially because of the defense. So definitely like that. Most games are competitive, back and forth. So usually turns into good fantasy production as it has all season. So pretty good matchup versus the Giants. He is pretty pricey, but he does offer us a safe floor. It's going to be hard to afford him in cash games, so that's kind of like why I like going down to Jared Goff. But in GPPs, I definitely like Kyler Murray and using some of his his receiving options as well. And then a core play number 3 at quarterback this week. It's going to be Matt Ryan. I love this game for fantasy purposes. It's my favorite game of the week, so I like loading up on it. It kind of feels like last week's Falcons versus Cardinals game. I wouldn't say the Rams defense is awful, but it's definitely below average right now, especially without Talib, which is another reason why I like Matt Ryan. We got a 54-point over-under, 25-point implied team total, so it should be pretty back and forth. Matt Ryan is throwing the ball a ton. Like I said, I love volume, even at the quarterback position. And he's averaging 43 pass attempts per game, which leads the NFL. He's got 335 passing yards per game and 2.5 touchdowns per game. So, he's been fantastic this season. If he just puts up his average numbers, you're going to be pretty happy. It'll keep Talib, so it's going to be easier to throw in this defense. And Julio Jones should be able to have a big game here. The Rams are 24th DVOA versus the pass. And like I said, keep Talib, so it's going to make the secondary even more beatable. So I think Matt Ryan's a pretty safe play. He's evenly priced with Jared Goff pretty much, so I don't think you can go wrong with either. I just like Jared Goff's matchup a little bit better, and I think you might be a little bit lower on than Matt Ryan if you're just looking at game log, because people are going to be scared off from that 0-point game he just had, or something like that. But it was really low scoring, I believe maybe 2 points, but so that might dictate ownership or sway ownership to Matt Ryan, which I understand. So I think they're both fine cash plays. So definitely like Matt Ryan this week. I love this game for fantasy. Points should be scored, and I think another 20, 25 point, maybe even 30-point ceiling game is possible for Matt Ryan this week. Then on to the running back position. I love Leonard Fournette this week at 7K. He's going to be the most popular back of the week, possibly the most popular play on the slate this week. He's pretty much a lock. And like I always say, volume. It's king in DFS, and that's what we're getting with Leonard Fournette. He's averaging 19.17 rushing attempts per game, which is third highest on the slate, only behind Chris Carson and Marlon Mack. He's averaging 5.83 targets per game, which is fifth highest on the slate, only behind Austin Eckler, Alvin Kamara, David Johnson, and Tariq Cohen. He has the highest yards per carry after contact of qualified running backs on the slate. He's got an elite matchup versus the Cincinnati Bengals, who are 26th DVOA versus the run this season, allowing 36.1 points per game to running backs, which is dead last. And positive touchdown regression is coming. The guy has yet to score, and he keeps putting up double-digit fantasy days. So, it's bound to break out sometime in the touchdown department. I think it comes here versus Cincy. So, Leonard Fournette is pretty much a lock and load this week. I would not fade him. You can fade him at your own risk, but that's not something I'm personally going to be doing, even in GPPs. Next core play running back is Chris Carson at 6,500 versus Baltimore. Again, volume. It's so important in DFS, and that's what Chris Carson does. He gets a ton of volume. After the week 2 and 3 mess with fumbles, he's been dominant with 3 straight games of 20-plus carries and over 100 yards. He's just way too cheap for a bell cow back, and he's also involved in the passing game, so he gives us some PPR upside as well. We have a high Vegas total. It's a 15.5 point over-under, 27-point team total, which is one of the highest on the slate. The Ravens are 24th DVOA versus the run and allowing over a rushing touchdown per game. You guys saw Nick Chubb absolutely destroy them. Now, I know they were missing one of their best defensive tackles, but still, Chris Carson should be fine here. And he's also a home favorite running back, which we love in DFS because that's great correlation, because that means the home teams that are favorites tend to run the ball more later in the game because they have the lead and they want to grind out the clock. And I think he's got a pretty safe floor, and he's got an extremely high ceiling. He scored in the high 20s multiple times this season. So I like Chris Carson quite a bit. 6,500 is just way too cheap for me. So definitely like to load up on Chris Carson. Josh Jacobs comes in at 5K, which I think is extremely too cheap, especially for the coming off that big game he had versus Chicago, which is a really tough run defense. He had 26 carries, 3 catches on 4 targets for over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. His volume potential at this price screams value to me, and the 4 targets he had last week were encouraging because the coach said they wanted to get him more involved in the passing game, which they did, even though they had a lead. So that was really encouraging to see. Helps boost his floor and his ceiling. He gets a great matchup versus Green Bay, who's really struggled with running backs this season, as they are 28th DVOA versus the run and allowing nearly 30 points per game to running backs this season. Also allowing over 100 yards and a touchdown per game as well. Oakland has the 4th best offensive line versus defensive line run blocking matchup as well, according to PFF. And the only risk here for me would be if Oakland gets down early, but Green Bay's offense has not been that impressive this season, especially if Devontae Adams is out, and they didn't look very good last night versus the Lions. Lions ended up jumping to an early lead, so if this game stays competitive, which I think it does, I believe they are 6-point dogs, but that seems a little too high for me. So I think the Raiders can stay in this game, and they should be able to get Josh Jacobs about near 20 touches. And if he gets more than 20 touches, I think at 5K, it's going to be hard for him to hit value. I think he falls into the end zone, hopefully twice, and you'd be pretty happy at 5K. I think he's one of the better value options on the slate. Then we'll move on to wide receivers. And I will say I like Dalvin Cook, too. I know a lot of people are going to say, why aren't you talking about Dalvin Cook? I think he's fine. I'm just saying, I really like these 3 running backs this week because it allows me to fit a lot of other guys in my wide receiver spot, tight end spot, quarterback spot this week. Because, I think Josh Jacobs, I know he's pretty cheap, and there's a little bit of risk there. I think he's got some pretty high upside this week, too, and I think he's got a decent floor, too. So definitely like Josh Jacobs. An honorable mention to Dalvin Cook. I think he's fine, too. And Cooper Kupp at 7,400. So like I said, I'm all in for this bounce back game for the Rams offense. I'm going to repeat a couple things here, but it's a 54-point over-under, highest implied team total slate. Cooper Kupp owns a 28% target share, which is second in the league, only behind Michael Thomas, and a 60% weighted opportunity share. And besides last week, he's seen at least 9 targets and had 100 yards in 4 straight games. Atlanta struggles at generating pressure, which will give Goff more time to throw, helping his receiving options. And Atlanta has 30th DVOA versus the pass and allowing 44 points per game to receivers and allowing nearly 200 receiving yards per game to receivers. So I think Cooper Kupp's in a big bounce back spot here. He should be able to smash, and wouldn't be surprised if we see another 25-30 point game from Cooper Kupp, especially if the Falcons can keep this game competitive, which I think they should be able to, because I'm not too really concerned about the Rams defense. So really, it should be a back and forth game, high scoring. I think Cooper Kupp's a big part of that. I think they look to get him back heavily involved. So I definitely like Cooper Kupp a lot. I know I did last week and it hurt, but we're going right back to the well. I got no feelings in DFS. Someone burns me the last week, I'll definitely go right back to them if they're getting a great matchup. And hopefully that lowers ownership. I don't really think it will because people are a lot smarter at these ages in DFS. But if it lowers his ownership even a little bit, I'll take that because I really like Cooper Kupp. Cash games and GPPs. The next guy is Larry Fitzgerald at 6,100 versus New York Giants, that is. He's just old reliable. He's pretty consistent. He's in a high pass volume offense that plays at a pretty high pace, actually the highest pace in the league. Third highest Vegas over-under of the slate at 49.5. The Giants are getting absolutely torched by receivers this season, allowing 45.4 points per game to the position. Giants are 29th DVOA versus wide receivers and allowing over 200 receiving yards per game. Fitz has as PFF's number 1 rated wide receiver quarterback matchup of the week in the slot versus Grant Haley. And Edelman just ate them up, and he's also a slot receiver, as is Fitzgerald. So I think he's getting for a pretty big game here. Christian Kirk should be back, which I actually think Christian Kirk's a fantastic value options this week. I just don't want to list 40 receivers. So I have nothing against Christian Kirk as long as he plays, but I really like this matchup for Fitzgerald, and I think he should be able to eat too. So I really like Fitzgerald. And then I have another Rams wide receiver in Robert Woods at 5,900. So I actually just copy and pasted a couple of things here, so I'm not going to just completely repeat myself. But like I said, it's a high Vegas total. Atlanta can't generate pressure. Should be able to help Jared Goff. It's a great matchup, 44 points per game, over 200 receiving yards per game. But I will say about Robert Woods, he does not have the top tier volume of Cooper Kupp, but he still has a pretty respectable 21% target share in this offense, and he's just way too cheap. And I imagine he's going to have quite the ownership here because it's a fantastic matchup. And you're getting almost 2,000 savings off of Cooper Kupp. Now, I don't think he's got the safety of Cooper Kupp, but he definitely has the ceiling. Robert Woods had a huge game this season. I believe it was week 2 where he had over 30 fantasy points. But at this price versus Atlanta, I would take that all day. I assume they're going to be more concerned about Cooper Kupp more than anybody. It's not like you can really key in on one guy in this offense because, Brandon Cooks is obviously fine. Robert Woods is a good receiver too, and Cooper Kupp's, near elite now. And, it might hurt a little bit if Todd Gurley doesn't play, but I really don't think the offense is going to lose a beat if he doesn't play. But if he does play, the defense would have to worry about Todd Gurley, so maybe it even helps the passing game even more. But definitely like Robert Woods, he's way too cheap, and I think he's viable in all options, not like cash games and GPPs. And the last wide receiver I want to talk about is T.Y. Hilton at 5,900 versus Houston. He just owns the Texans. I don't know what it is, but he does. Now, a lot of that was with Andrew Luck, but still, it still stands. Jacoby Brissett has not been that bad this season. 4 out of his last 5 games versus Houston, he's had at least 115 yards. I believe one game he had 190 some, and then the other one he had over 170. He's been very consistent this season, even with the beef brisket at quarterback. He has double-digit points in all but one game, and that was coming off an injury in a game where they were surprisingly beating the Chiefs, so they didn't really have to pass the ball a ton, kind of just grinding the clock out with Marlon Mack. Texans are 15th DVOA versus the pass, which is mid-pack, but they're giving up a near league high 42 points per game to wide receivers, so this is definitely a beatable matchup. He owns PFF's second highest wide receiver versus cornerback matchup of the week versus Jonathan Joseph, who's giving up 0.39 points per route covered this season and 1.93 yards per route covered, which both of those numbers are way below average, above average for the matchup for T.Y. Hilton. So I think T.Y. Hilton's a fantastic play here. Seems a little bit too cheap for this upside, and he's honestly had a pretty safe floor this year, so I think T.Y. Hilton is fine in all formats. And then as for the tight end position, trust me, I would love to get Evan Ingram, but I was like pre-building some lineups just trying to see how roster construction looks like. I can't afford Evan Ingram because it's going to cost me an expensive running back or a guy like Cooper Kupp, and I really don't want to get rid of those guys because they just have such safe high floors and high ceilings as well. So I feel fine with Hunter Henry here at 4K versus Tennessee. He's just way too cheap for how involved he was last week, where he saw 9 targets, 100 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Not saying he's going to do that again, but it was still really encouraging to see coming off the injury, and this is going to make him really popular, but it's for a good reason. Now, we don't have a ton of data on him this season because he's only played 2 games, but he has scored 10 points and 33 points. And I really wasn't sure how involved he was going to be on Sunday night, but he did see 66% of the snaps in his first week back from injury, so that's very encouraging, and it was a positive sign, and I do imagine that grows heading into the next week. So Hunter Henry is going to be popular, and I think he's a fantastic value option. Tennessee Titans are pretty middle of the road versus the tight end position, maybe a little bit below average. So I think Hunter Henry should be fine, and he does save some salary, so you can spend it at the running back position or wide receivers, which I always tend to like to do better than tight ends. Now, I'm not saying you can't play Evan Ingram. He's just really expensive, so he doesn't really fit my lineup builds too much. And then we have, for the last guy in this video, Mark Andrews at 4,900 versus Seattle. He has by far the #1 tight end versus safety matchup on PFF this week versus Tedrick Thompson, who is giving up over 4 yards per route covered this season, which is worst of all safeties. Seattle is allowing 16.3 points per game to tight ends this season, which is 4th worst in the league. He's top 4 in target share, market share, and weighted opportunity share for tight ends. He has the 2nd highest average depth of target of 9.3 yards. That's only behind the 2-game sample size of Hunter Henry. So if you remove Hunter Henry, he's got the best ADOT, and so that really shows his big play potential. He's a very athletic tight end, and this is a really high Vegas total, and they are road underdogs, so this could lead to more targets. So I think Mark Andrews is a fine play, and that's really why I don't want to spend all the way up for Evan Ingram, because I think we got similar upside with Hunter Henry and Mark Andrews that are a lot cheaper, even though Ingram's got that great matchup versus Arizona. Anyway, guys, that's going to be it for this video. Remember to leave a like if it was helpful. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment below. Remember to hit the like button. And remember to subscribe if you're new. And follow me on Twitter at ChrisPennell16. Check out the spreadsheets if you are interested on Patreon in my Slack chat. And I'll see you guys in the next video.